You wake up, walk into your kitchen, and turn a small metal handle. Cold water spills into a clean glass. You do not sniff it. You do not search the surface for insects. You do not wonder which animal died upstream last night. You just drink. Now erase the pipes. Erase the refrigerator, the plastic bottle, the filter, the city reservoir, and the invisible army of pumps and treatment plants working while you sleep. Go back tens of thousands of years, and your next drink is not waiting behind a faucet. It may be a spring hidden under grass, a muddy pool shared with antelope, or a river that disappears before the dry season ends. And if you choose badly, there is no emergency room coming. So the question is simple. Before wells, plumbing, filters, or bottled water, how did your ancestors get enough water to survive? And how did they know whether it was safe enough to drink? The first answer is almost embarrassingly simple. You went where the water was. For most of human prehistory, water was not something your ancestors brought into the landscape. Water decided where the landscape was usable in the first place. Camps, hunting routes, animal trails, edible plants, shade, and migration corridors all bent around reliable freshwater. You can actually see this pattern in stone and sediment. At Olduvai Gorge in northern Tanzania, archaeologists have found dense concentrations of early stone tools and butchered animal bones near ancient freshwater springs dating to roughly 1.88 million years ago. At the famous FLK Zinj area, geological work found evidence for a freshwater spring less than 200 meters from a major concentration of tools and animals remains. That distance matters. 200 meters is close enough that water can shape almost everything you do. You can drink, butcher food, watch animals approach, gather plants growing in wetter soil, and return again and again without carrying gallons across open ground. And here's the part nobody talks about. Your ancestors did not need a mental map filled with blue lines. They had clues moving all around them. Animals create trails to water. Green vegetation can reveal damp ground. Birds can gather near wetlands. A valley can funnel runoff after rain. Springs can keep flowing when a shallow pool turns to cracked mud. Water leaves fingerprints. That does not mean every ancient human magically knew where to dig. It means survival rewarded people who learned landscapes intimately, remembered seasonal sources, and passed that knowledge through the group. Miss the signs? And thirst teaches fast. But finding water creates a second problem. Because water and safe water are not the same thing. Picture yourself kneeling beside a shallow pool. The surface is brown, hoofprints cut into the mud. Somewhere nearby, animals drink, urinate, defecate, fight, bleed, and sometimes die. You have no microscope, no chlorine, and no idea that bacteria or parasites exist. Do you drink? Sometimes yes. Ancient people almost certainly drank untreated surface water because there were situations when the alternative was dehydration. But here is what does not make sense until you think about it. Not knowing about microbes does not mean you know nothing about water quality. You can see mud. You can smell rot. You can notice that moving water often looks clearer than a stagnant pool. You can learn that one spring makes people sick less often than another place downstream. You do not need germ theory to remember consequences. And groundwater could be especially valuable. Research at Olduvai has identified ancient spring-fed environments beside important hominin activity areas, while broader modeling of East Africa suggests persistent groundwater springs may have acted as refuges during dry periods, when lakes became saline or seasonal. In other words, your ancestors were not choosing between clean modern water and filthy ancient water. They were choosing between sources with different risks, using experience instead of chemistry. And sometimes the safest strategy was simply to leave. Mobile hunter-gatherers could move camp when a source failed. That is a brutal kind of flexibility, but flexibility is power. When the landscape changes, the water source was not part of your home. Your home followed the water. Now comes the strange part. Humans are built for heat, but heat makes water dangerous to lose. You sweat a lot. Compared with other apes, your species has an extraordinary ability to cool the body through sweating, which helped humans stay active in hot, open environments. You might expect that to make humans hopelessly dependent on constant drinking. But in 2021, evolutionary anthropologist Herman Pontzer and colleagues compared water turnover in humans with chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans. After accounting for body size, activity, climate, and energy use, human water turnover was about 30 to 50% lower than in the other apes. Think about that for a second. You are a sweating ape that somehow became better at running on less water. That does not mean your ancestors could cross deserts without drinking. They could not. But even a modest improvement in water conservation may have stretched the distance between one reliable source and the next, and not every drop entered the body from a stream. Food contains water too. Fresh meat, fruit, roots, tubers, and other plant foods all contribute fluid. Modern studies of human water balance count water from food as part of total intake, because your body does not care whether a molecule arrived in a cup or inside a berry. This changes the picture. Your ancestors' water supply was not one pool. It was the whole daily system. Drink when you can. Eat moisture-rich foods when available. Avoid unnecessary heat when possible. Remember the next source. And do not waste what your body already has. Your body became part of the canteen. But biology only gets you so far. Eventually, the real breakthrough is carrying water. This sounds obvious because you live in a world drowning in containers, cups, bottles, buckets, tanks, pipes. But a portable container is one of those technologies that looks trivial only after somebody invents it. Imagine trying to carry a liter of water with bare hands. You cannot. Now imagine finding an ostrich egg. At Deep Hoof Rock Shelter in South Africa, archaeologists, led by Pierre-Jean Texier, studied engraved ostrich eggshell fragments from around 60,000 years ago. These were not just decoration. The evidence shows they came from functional eggshell containers, and an average ostrich egg has a volume of about 1 liter. 1 liter changes your world. A small hole can be opened in the shell, the contents removed, and the strong shell reused as a flask. Later hunter-gatherers in southern Africa are documented using ostrich eggshells this way, often plugging the opening with a stopper. Now water moves with you. You can travel farther from a spring. You can bring water back to children or someone injured. You can cross a dry stretch that would otherwise cut the landscape in half. Here is the part nobody talks about. A water container is not just storage. It is freedom measured in kilometers. An ostrich eggshell is only what archaeology happens to preserve. Well, containers made from hides, wood, bark, woven fibers, gourds, or other organic materials can rot away, meaning the archaeological record almost certainly misses many ancient containers. The absence of an object is not the absence of an idea. Then, much later, something fundamental changes. Instead of following water, humans begin forcing water to stay close. Once farming communities settle in one place, moving every time a stream shifts becomes much more expensive. You have fields, stored food, houses, livestock, children, and structures that cannot simply walk 5 kilometers to the next spring. So you dig. In eastern Germany, archaeologists excavated 4 early Neolithic wooden wells built by farming communities more than 7,000 years ago. A 2012 study led by Willy Tegel used tree ring dating on 151 preserved oak timbers and placed them between 5,469 and 5098 BCE. The carpentry was shockingly sophisticated. These farmers cut large oak timbers and joined them into sturdy, box-like well linings using carefully fitted joints. Despite working in a world before metal woodworking tools became common, the preserved timbers still carry traces of that craftsmanship. Think about what that means. A well is a reversal of the ancient relationship with water. For millions of years, your ancestors moved toward reliable water. Now a settled community reaches into the ground and brings reliable water toward itself. That is bigger than convenience. It is control. And once water becomes controllable, settlement becomes more stable. More stable settlement supports larger communities. Larger communities create new problems: waste, crowding, contamination. But they also create the pressure for drainage, storage, channels, cisterns, aqueducts, pipes, and eventually the faucet in your kitchen. The glass in your hand has a very long shadow. So, did ancient humans drink water? Of course. But the real story is that drinking was never the simple part. Your ancestors had to solve a chain of problems every single day. Find water before thirst became dangerous. Judge one source against another without knowing what a microbe was. Conserve enough inside the body to keep moving. Carry water when the landscape opened up, and eventually dig deep enough to stop depending on the nearest river. They answered each problem differently. They followed springs. They learned landscapes. Their bodies conserved water surprisingly well. They turned ostrich eggs into 1-liter flasks, and when permanent villages made migration too costly, they built wells from carefully fitted oak. None of those solutions looks dramatic from your kitchen, but stack them together and you get civilization. Because the history of water is really the history of how much uncertainty a human being has to carry. For most of your species' existence, thirst was tied directly to weather, geography, memory, and luck. A failed spring was not an inconvenience. It could redraw a migration route, split a group, or end a life. Now you turn a handle. The water arrives cold, clear, and almost silent. You may even let it run for a few seconds because it is not cold enough yet. While beneath your feet a system your ancestors could barely imagine moves to treated water through. A pipe's at the exact moment you ask for it. That ordinary glass is not ordinary at all. It is millions of years of thirst, finally hidden behind a tap.